The story begins inside a prison. Not just any prison, but one built on a lonely, isolated island in the middle of the sea. On this day, several new prisoners were brought in. Among them was a man named Edmund. The moment he saw the warden, Edmund pleaded, "Sir, please help me. I've done nothing wrong. I've been sent here under false accusations." The warden calmly replied, "I know. If you had truly committed a crime, you'd be in a prison on the mainland. But the ones who are brought here, they are the victims of conspiracy." Without another word, the warden ordered Edmund to be savagely beaten, then locked him inside a tiny cell with nothing but a wooden door and a small window. Days turned into months, months into years. Alone in his cell, Edmund endured unbearable suffering. On the wall, he had carved the words, "O God, grant me justice." But as 12 long years dragged by, even his faith in God began to fade. He felt certain he would die in this prison, until one day, something unexpected happened. From beneath the floor of his cell, the ground began to tremble. Startled, Edmund froze in shock. At first, he was terrified, but then he realized someone was digging their way up from below. Moments later, a man emerged from the dirt. His name was Abe, a prisoner from the lower level. For 5 long years, he had been digging a tunnel, and by sheer twist of fate, that tunnel opened directly into Edmund's cell. To Edmund, it felt like a sign from God. For the first time in years, Edmund had a companion, someone to talk to. Until now, the crushing loneliness had nearly driven him mad. Abe excitedly invited Edmond to his cell. For Edmund, even this was a blessing. At last, he wouldn't have to scratch marks on the wall just to pass time. But when he entered Abe's chamber, he was stunned. This was no ordinary prison cell. It looked more like a small study or a modest hotel room. There were chairs to sit on, and shelves lined with countless books. Abe made Edmond a promise. If Edmund helped him dig the tunnel, then in return, he would teach him to read, to study, and to learn from his vast collection of books. With nothing else to do, Edmund agreed instantly. The two men were about to resume digging when they suddenly heard the footsteps of guards above. Alarmed, Edmund rushed back to his cell and quickly covered the tunnel entrance with garbage, since guards passed by twice a day, once to remove waste and once to deliver food. Aside from those moments, they were free to work without fear of being discovered. Later, Abe cut a lock of his own hair, struck sparks from a stone, and lit a candle using the strands. In the dim glow, the two crawled into the cramped tunnel and began digging once again. It was back-breaking work, the space suffocatingly small. Abe estimated that, at their current pace, it would take another 3 years before they finally broke free. One day while resting, Edmund discovered one of Abe's books. Through it, he learned that Abe had once been a skilled soldier and master swordsman. From that moment on, Edmund made a demand. "If you don't teach me how to fight with a sword, I will no longer help you dig." Because now, Edmund had only one goal in life, to take revenge on the enemies who had conspired to put him in this hell. Hearing his words, Abe agreed. And so, in that dark prison, he began to train Edmund, teaching him the art of combat, the strategies of war, and the skills of a fighter. Abe realized that speed was the greatest strength of any warrior. To train Edmund, he used something simple, drops of water dripping from the ceiling of his cell. Moving his hand with lightning speed, he sliced through the stream of falling drops without letting a single one touch him. He told Edmund, "The day your hands move so fast that even falling water cannot touch you, that is the day you'll truly become a warrior." From then on, Abe returned his focus to digging the tunnel, while Edmund devoted himself to relentless practice. Days passed. Eventually, Abe broke apart a piece of wood from the prison door and fashioned a makeshift sword. With it, he began teaching Edmund the true art of sword fighting. When their training sessions ended, Edmund would immerse himself in study. His days now revolved around 3 things: digging the tunnel, swordsmanship practice, and reading books. Months later, Edmund's sword skills had sharpened dramatically. In fact, Abe soon realized that Edmund was becoming even better than himself. One evening, during a quiet conversation, Edmund learned the truth about Abe's past. Years ago, Abe had worked for a wealthy family named Stavia. His master had amassed a fortune in treasure, which he carefully hid away. That secret, however, led to Abe's downfall. Napoleon himself imprisoned Abe, desperate to extract the location of the hidden wealth. Hearing this, Edmund burned with rage, for it was because of Napoleon's betrayal and political games that Edmund too had been unjustly imprisoned. Time passed, and every day the tunnel brought them closer to freedom. Then one day, while digging, they struck roots from a tree. Abe's eyes lit up. This meant they were close to the surface. Both men were ecstatic, but their joy didn't last. Suddenly, the tunnel collapsed violently. Rocks and dirt came crashing down, burying Abe beneath the rubble. Panicked, Edmund scrambled to pull him free. They realized they had dug the wrong way and accidentally broken into a food storage chamber. Amid the chaos, a heavy stone had crushed Abe's chest. His lungs were badly damaged. He was dying. In his final weakening breaths, Abe whispered to Edmund, "Under a stone in my cell, you will find a book. Beneath that book lies something hidden." Racing back, Edmund searched and discovered it. A map. The legendary treasure map that Napoleon had been seeking all along. Abe clutched Edmund's hand and made him swear, "Use this wealth only for good. Promise me. Stay away from evil as much as you can." Tears welled in Edmund's eyes. "I promise," he vowed. And with that, Abe drew his last breath. Edmund was left devastated, realizing that once again, he was utterly alone. Just then, a guard arrived at Edmund's cell door with food. Edmund quickly hid behind the wall. The guard called out several times, but got no answer. Nervously, he opened the cell and froze in terror. Abe's lifeless body lay inside. Panicked, the guard rushed off to alert his superiors. Seizing the opportunity, Edmund slipped into the tunnel and sealed the entrance behind him. Soon, the guards returned with reinforcements. They placed Abe's corpse into a sack, while Edmund lay hidden, waiting silently in the darkness for them to leave. When the coast was finally clear, Edmund crept back into the cell and stared at Abe's still body. That's when an idea struck him. He quickly climbed into the sack himself, taking Abe's place. Moments later, the warden and his men came to remove the body. Because the prison was on a remote island, they decided it was best to throw the corpse into the sea. Meanwhile, another guard arrived at Edmund's cell with food. After knocking several times with no response, he opened the door, only to discover that Edmund was gone and Abe's body was inside. Horrified, the guard ran screaming to inform the warden. But outside, a storm was raging. Amid the howling wind, the warden struggled to make sense of the guard's words. At that very moment, Edmund burst from the sack, snatched the warden's keys, and in the struggle, both men toppled into the ocean. Underwater, Edmund freed himself from his bindings with the stolen keys. Rage, bottled up for 12 long years, exploded within him. He seized the warden and mercilessly dragged him beneath the waves until the man drowned. Then, without looking back, Edmund swam far out into the endless sea. By morning, he awoke on the shore of another island. Relieved but weak, he had no idea how he had survived the night. Yet, freedom was still out of reach, for a group of pirates had been watching him all along. Certain he was about to die, Edmund braced himself. But their leader, Luigi, offered him a chance. "Fight our traitor, Jacob. If you win, you live. If you lose, you die. Either way, we don't plan on keeping him alive." With no choice, Edmund fought for his life. Jacob was a skilled swordsman, but Edmund had learned from the best. Abe's training gave him the edge. With precise strikes, Edmund overpowered Jacob and threw him to the ground. But instead of killing him, Edmund turned to Luigi and said, "We can both serve you. Skilled men like us aren't easy to find. Why waste us?" Impressed by Edmund's intelligence and mercy, Luigi spared them both. On board the ship, Edmund recounted his life story to the captain. Moved by his suffering, the captain granted him his freedom, allowing him to pursue vengeance. Grateful for his spared life, Jacob pledged eternal loyalty to Edmund. The two men returned to the city together. Edmund asked Jacob to prepare a boat while he attended to personal matters. That night, Edmund slipped into his former master's home. But everything had changed. His old employer no longer even recognized him. And soon, Edmund learned the devastating truth. His father had died of grief after Edmund's arrest. But the cruelest blow came when he discovered the ultimate betrayal. His former friend, Mondego, was the one who had framed him. And worse, Mondego had married the woman Edmund was once destined to wed. The next morning, Edmund and Jacob set sail for the island where the hidden treasure was said to be buried. Together, they searched every corner of the island but found nothing. Then Edmund realized the treasure must be hidden underwater. Following the map's markings, he dove into a secret lagoon. Deep beneath the surface, he discovered ancient chests covered in seaweed and stone. Forcing one open, he was blinded by the dazzling glow of gold and jewels spilling out. Jacob, overwhelmed with excitement, rushed to haul as much treasure as possible onto their small boat. But there was far too much, enough to require an entire ship. Even so, Edmund felt little joy. His heart burned with something greater than greed, revenge. He vowed that this treasure would serve only one purpose: to destroy those who had betrayed him. With the fortune, Edmund purchased a massive palace. Soon he reintroduced himself to French society as a mysterious, newly wealthy aristocrat. To cement his presence, he hosted a grand party in his lavish estate, inviting all the city's elite. His charm, wealth, and extravagant lifestyle made him the talk of the town. But deep down, every move was calculated. His true aim was to lure the attention of his treacherous former friend, Mondego. And indeed, Mondego appeared at the party. But, without a word, he quickly left, unsettled by this new powerful figure. Meanwhile, Edmund's former lover, Mercedes, had long since married Mondego. Yet her life was far from happy. Mondego had squandered his fortune recklessly, sinking into debt and ruin. He couldn't even pay off his bank loans, and thanks to Edmund's secret manipulations, all outside sources of money had been cut off. One day, Jacob brought Edmund surprising news. Mondego had a son, Albert. Immediately, Edmund devised a plan. With the help of a beautiful female accomplice and his pirate allies, he staged Albert's kidnapping. Once the boy was captured, Edmund himself appeared as the heroic savior, rescuing Albert from danger. Grateful and awestruck, Albert begged him, "You must come to my birthday party." Little did he know it had all been Edmund's doing. At first, Edmund feigned reluctance, but eventually agreed. At the party, Albert proudly introduced Edmund to his father. After 13 long years, Edmund and Mondego stood face to face again. But Mondego didn't recognize him. Edmund's appearance had changed too much. Mercedes, however, wasn't so easily fooled. The moment she saw Edmund twisting his hair absent-mindedly, a small habit of his from long ago, suspicion stirred in her heart. She knew this man had to be Edmund. As the evening unfolded, Edmund exaggerated tales about his wealth. "I'm in the gold trade. I own more treasure than I can count. In fact, tomorrow I'll be bringing 100 kilos of gold into the city by ship." He knew well that Mondego, desperate for money, would be unable to resist. The responsibility of unloading this supposed shipment was given to a corrupt official named Wilford, a man with deep ties to the police and the underworld. Hearing Edmund's words, Wilford soon met with Mondego, and together the two began to hatch a scheme. The very next day, Mondego and Wilford's men plotted to ambush Edmund's shipment. Their plan was simple: rob all the gold as soon as it entered the city. Mondego assured Wilford that he knew just the right man for the job. What they didn't know was that Edmund had deliberately drawn them together, the very same men who had once conspired to throw him into prison. That night, after the party, Mercedes secretly slipped into Edmund's carriage. Looking straight into his eyes, she whispered, "Mondego told me you were executed." Edmund froze. He realized instantly that Mercedes had recognized his true identity. Panic surged through him. This revelation could destroy his carefully laid plan for revenge. He urged her to leave quickly, fearing exposure. Later that same night, Mondego's hired thief struck. The man stormed Edmund's ship, stealing the crates of gold with ease. Certain he had pulled off the perfect heist, he rejoiced, only to be ambushed by the police moments later. Because it was all Edmund's design. Dragged before him in chains, the thief trembled as Edmund struck him down and looped a rope around his neck. With cold fury in his eyes, Edmund hissed, "I am Edmund. Now die knowing exactly what sin condemned you." And with that, the man was executed. But Edmund's work wasn't done. His next target was Wilford, the corrupt magistrate. Years ago, Wilford's father, a supporter of Napoleon, had been murdered by his own son. Hungry for power, Wilford killed his father, framed Edmund with forged letters, and condemned him to prison. Now, Edmund set a trap. He forced Wilford into confessing his crimes, believing no proof could ever be used against him. With arrogant pride, Wilford admitted everything. But, hidden in the shadows of the room, police officers had been listening the entire time. Wilford was arrested on the spot. Meanwhile, a completely ruined Mondego was preparing to flee the city. He begged Mercedes to escape with him, but she refused. And then she revealed a truth that shattered him. "Albert is not your son. He's Edmund's." Mercedes had been pregnant with Edmund's child the day he was arrested. To protect her honor, she had married Mondego. But Albert's true father was the man she had always loved. Mondego's world collapsed. In blind rage, he smashed everything around him before fleeing to an old fortress where he had hidden his stolen fortune. But when he opened the chests, his eyes widened in horror. There was no gold, only dust. Edmund had struck again. As Mondego screamed in madness, Edmund himself appeared, revealing his true identity at last. Enraged, Mondego drew his sword, launching into a furious duel. But Edmund was no longer the naive man he once betrayed. Years in prison had hardened him, trained him. The fight was brutal, but Edmund overpowered him. Just as he was about to strike the final blow, Albert burst into the room. Throwing himself between them, he cried, "I cannot let my father die like this." Edmund froze. For Albert, Mondego was still father. He hesitated and stepped back. But Mondego, treacherous to the end, seized the chance, snatching a pistol and firing at Edmund. At that very moment, Mercedes rushed in. She grabbed Albert, pulling him close, and revealed the final truth. "Albert, Mondego is not your father. Edmund is. He is your true blood." Albert's world shattered in an instant. In the chaos, Mondego suddenly seized his chance. He aimed his pistol straight at Edmund, but standing beside Edmund was his loyal friend Jacopo. With lightning reflexes, Jacopo struck the barrel with his knife, twisting it aside just as the gun went off. The shot rang out. The bullet tore through the air and struck Mercedes in the shoulder. She cried out in pain as Edmund and Albert rushed to her side. Taking advantage of the panic, Mondego fled once more. But Edmund was already waiting for him, blocking his path. The two enemies clashed again in a final, brutal duel. Steel met steel. Blow after blow shook the hall. And for a moment, it seemed Edmund might fall. Mondego's fury was relentless. But Edmund had endured too much, learned too much, to be defeated now. Drawing on every ounce of skill and fury, he struck with precision and overwhelming force, finally cutting Mondego down. Mondego fell lifeless, and with him, Edmund's burning fire of vengeance was at last extinguished. At long last, he found peace. Edmund reunited with Mercedes, the love he had never forgotten, and they were married. He embraced Albert as his own son, giving him the father he had always deserved. Together, they journeyed to the very place where Edmund had been imprisoned for 13 long years. Standing among the ruins of his torment, he honored the memory of Abbe Faria, the mentor who had given him wisdom and hope in the darkest of times. With the fortune he still possessed, Edmond purchased the entire land, so no innocent soul would ever again suffer the fate he had endured. And with that, Edmond Dantes' story came to its end.